Hello and welcome to episode 118 of Magic Rays of Light, a podcast exploring the world of Apple TV and so much more. My name is Sigmund Judge. I am joined by my co-host, Mr. Devon Dundee, and it is one of those weeks where we're going to focus on the so much more, at least in the initial stages of this episode, because as we record just a few hours beforehand, we got the introduction of new products from Apple in what was a 40-minute plus event. I think you had to get up a little earlier than normal, Devon. Setting the alarm clock, no doubt. Let's get into it.
Oh, for sure. I'm used to enjoying these events over lunch, sometimes even having like a snack while I'm watching. But this time Apple went earlier for us. And at 9 o'clock this morning, I was ready to go to watch Apple announce everything they had for us, including iPad Airs, iPad Pros, a bunch of fun accessories. We're going to get into all of it, and I'm excited to dive into it with you. Of course, we've also been covering everything over at Mac Stories. I've been going back and forth with John, getting his stories out today. And as we speak, Federico is actually in London. He's got an article sharing about his experience there that we'll link in the show notes. So lots and lots of exciting stuff going on today.
I'm very excited about our Let Loose event predictions. And of course, we will be highlighting dark matter as well this week. So exciting on so many fronts. But let's start with a recap of the Let Loose event, Devon. We started with Tim Cook giving us an update on Apple Vision Pro. Was convinced this was going to be the day, or maybe it will be the week still, where Apple Vision Pro is finally rolled out internationally. That didn't happen on this event, but what we did get to find out was that John M. Chu is reviewing the editing process for the upcoming Wicked adaptation on Apple Vision Pro. Very, very cool to see. We also saw what Ferrari were doing with Apple Vision Pro. I think whilst there wasn't much beyond that in terms of what Apple had to say today, they're still very, very much excited about the platform. And even though my prediction didn't come through this week, I think we're going to hear something about an international rollout soon. Hopefully before WWDC in just over a month's time. We also heard about the MacBook Air, the best-selling 13-inch and 15-inch laptops in the world. Didn't hear much about Federico's MacPad, and I think that's for good reason. But we did start this event with mention of a new iPad Air, Devon. And of course, you know, we've said this many, many times before. You are definitely the iPad guy when it comes to this podcast. Tell me about the new iPad Air and what you liked, maybe what you didn't like. I don't know.
Well, the iPad Air, I think the big news for today is that it now comes in a 13-inch model that also includes the liquid retina display that we've come to see on the 11-inch. So LCD, no new technology as far as the display goes, but it is bigger. So that's exciting in one sense. I think some people were expecting that mini LED display to come to the 13-inch, which might be disappointing, but I think this actually makes a lot of sense to keep both of those sizes on the same technology. It's also getting the M2 chip with its 8-core CPU, 10-core GPU, and 16-core neural engine, which Apple says is 50% faster than M1. The front camera is moved to the landscape side, which is something that I predicted. Very happy to see that happen. One of my predictions coming true so early on. It's great to see Apple moving those over to the landscape side. It's going to be so much better for video calls that way, and I'm happy to see that even though the iPad Air is based on some older screen technology, that they still took the time to make that change as far as the hardware goes. Another change I'm really happy to see is the storage tiers being brought up on the iPad Air. It now starts at 128 gigabytes, which really just seems like the minimum for any product these days. That 64 gigabytes they had before, just I don't know how much you can really do with something that size. But now the iPad Air goes all the way up to 1 terabyte. So starting at 128, going up to a terabyte, I think that's a really good range there, and I'm really, really happy about that starting point. Comes in 4 colors, blue, purple, starlight, and space gray. Sorry to all the pink fans out there. Pink's gone. Maybe it'll come back around on the next generation. The iPad Air now supports Apple Pencil Hover, which was a feature exclusive to the iPad Pros up till now. Very cool to see. It also has Wi-Fi 6E, so some faster Wi-Fi connections. The 13-inch model, they're taking advantage of the space there to improve the speakers a little bit. They say it has 2 times bass output. So if you really want to get the bass booming with your iPad Air speakers, make sure you go for the 13-inch model. As far as pricing goes, it's starting at the same $599 price point that the 11-inch has been at for quite some time now, which is awesome. And the 13-inch starts at $799. You can order the iPad Air now with delivery starting next week. I think this is a great update to the iPad Air, going to the M2, adding that extra size, bumping up the storage tiers without bumping up the pricing. All of that makes so much sense to me. And of course, the camera change I think is going to be great for people who are doing video calls. So I think just in terms of an upgrade for Apple's consumer tablet, the kind of the mid-range, I think this really is an awesome upgrade, giving people more options and a better starting place. So I'm really happy with this update of the iPad Air, and I'm also really happy for what this means for the iPad lineup. I think the whole lineup just makes a lot more sense, but we'll get into that in just a few minutes. What do you think of this iPad Air update?
I'm really, really happy with it. I think the biggest part that I'm really happy about is just the fact that a 13-inch model is now available to people that don't need the pro-named iPad. Mm-hmm. $799 for the 13-inch, I think, is a great price point there, especially for a device that people want to consume on and maybe, aren't looking to do complex workflows on. But let's be honest here, with an M2 chip, you've got a lot of legroom here. One of the issues that the iPad Pro always had was that the M2 kind of felt overpowered for what the iPad Pro was able to do. And I guess that's where we get into the iPad Pro news, because straight after the iPad Air was announced, we got the announcement, the headliner really, of a new iPad Pro, the first in 2 years. It is thinner and lighter, comes in 11-inch and 13-inch models like the iPad Air, but the 11-inch is 5.3 millimeters thick and just short of a pound in weight. The 13-inch is 5.1 millimeters thick, the thinnest Apple product ever made, and just over a pound at 1.28 pounds, which is a quarter of a pound lighter than the previous M2 version. A lot of that weight came from the mini LED display. The display that is on this machine now is an Ultra Retina XDR display with tandem OLED. And whilst I'm still waiting to kind of find out more about the process in terms of building this tandem OLED display, the idea is that this is 2 displays brought into one, which allow for 1000 nits of full screen brightness, 1600 nits of peak brightness for HDR content. If that wasn't enough, when it comes to the display, we've also got 2 options. We've got your normal glossy screen display and something that I know a lot of pros have been waiting for. That's the nano texture, which is an option available on the 1TB and 2TB models. And that's going to be for reduced glare, which probably would be good on the field somewhere. It's going to be interesting to see how that works in terms of the nano texture finish on an XDR display. Apple advised that you polish with the cloth that's included and really don't touch the screen. So this is a completely different process. I'm really looking forward to finding out more about this in the coming weeks. But both displays mean brighter specular highlights and more details in shadows and low light. The big issue that we were talking about recently about blooming with the mini LED display, from the hands-on that I've seen little videos and clips from across London Battersea Power Station and New York, it seems as though they've been able to do something quite special here to at least limit that blooming effect. The display also still features a reference mode for color grading and other workflows. I think that is something that is trickled down from the 13-inch now to the 11-inch on these new models, which is very, very cool. Now, Devon, as a big iPad guy, we were at M2, then we went to M3, and I can't believe we're already at M4, debuting in the iPad Pro. What are your thoughts on the M4 chip and its capabilities?
I'm just amazed that Apple would debut an M-series chip on an iPad. We've always thought of these chips as Mac chips, and I was just astounded when they brought the M1 down to the iPad at all. I thought the iPad would stay on the A-series forever. But now, not only have we seen the M-series trickle down to the iPad Air, but now a whole new generation of Apple Silicon is starting with the iPad Pro. It feels like a big moment to me. And I'm sure there's a lot of elements that went into it as far as just timing and, how things work out in the industry. And also, again, the needs of this display, which is something that Apple really talked about during the event, was just how much power it takes to run this new Ultra Retina XDR display. And it all culminates in us getting the M4 today, something even when I heard the rumors, I thought there's a 0% chance of this happening. So it really is amazing. And it's cool to see the power that Apple's bringing to the iPad. And of course, it also gives us a preview of what's coming to the next generation of Macs as well. So some details about this M4 chip. It's built on the second generation 3nm process. It includes a new display engine to power that tandem OLED screen. I think that's a big element in Apple's decision to bring the M4 to this device. It includes a 9-core CPU, a 10-core GPU, and 16-core neural engine. And if you go for the 1TB or 2TB models, you're going to get an extra CPU core and some extra RAM. So that's something to consider. It's not configurable as far as just adding that on as a feature, but if you go for the extra storage, that comes with it. The chip includes dynamic caching as well as hardware accelerated mesh shading and ray tracing. Those were some huge graphics improvements we saw with the M3, now coming to the iPad via the M4. And AV1 hardware acceleration is coming for the first time on the iPad, which is going to be great for playing back video on the web and keeping that battery drain as low as possible when you're streaming and helping out your battery life on the iPad.
Something we hope comes to future iterations of the Apple Vision Pro, of course, would be really helpful for 3D video with YouTube. In terms of spatial video, I wanted to talk about the cameras on Apple's iPad Pro. Really interesting here. Front camera, of course, has been moved to landscape sides, just like on the iPad Air. Yes, we'll get into that in a minute. 1 point for you, Devon. Have you noticed there are no points for me so far? That's a trend. We get an adaptive True Tone flash added to the rear camera for improved document scanning, which is an interesting pro feature. There is, however, no ultra-wide camera on this, which means that spatial video capture is a no-go as far as I can tell, which was a big surprise for me because this was something that I kind of predicted to go the other way. Also, not included in this next generation of iPad Pro are 5G mmWave, which doesn't seem to be something that was really adopted by a lot of cellular service providers. And talking of service and cellular providers, the SIM slot is gone. So this is eSIM exclusively. Very interesting move there. Of course, the iPad Pro is available in space black and silver. No fancy colours, yet again. Storage options start at 256 gigabytes and go all the way up to 2 terabytes, with pricing starting at $999 for the 11-inch and $1,299 for the 13-inch. Interestingly, no charger in the UK, just the USB-C cable. And that's also the same in some countries in Europe. You can order now, with deliveries coming next week. And also coming next week, and then further into the future, are of course the Pro apps that make use of this M4 chip that I want to get into. Starting with Final Cut Pro.
Yeah, it's really cool to see Apple spending keynote time talking about Pro apps for the iPad. Of course, we saw Final Cut Pro come to the iPad last year, but now we're seeing Final Cut Pro for iPad version 2 rolling out, and they've got some really nice features coming for it. Apple says that final rendering on the M4 chip is up to 2 times faster than the M1, so save you some time on your rendering there, which we always appreciate. It supports up to 4 times more streams of ProRes RAW than the M1, and with this new version of Final Cut Pro, you'll be able to edit projects on an external drive rather than having to use your iPad's internal storage. I know that internal storage space on iPads is precious, and when you start working with ProRes video, those files can get really big really quickly. So being able to have all that footage on an external drive and edit it all from there, that is a really great addition to Final Cut Pro for iPad. The big one though, the one that you and I got very excited for when we saw Sigmund, something that we've talked about before and you've been pushing for quite some time actually, is a feature called Live Multicam. And it enables you to connect up to 4 cameras, either iPhones or iPads, wirelessly all at once and in one place. So the director of photography or the director, whoever's running the show on set, can hold an iPad, and all the camera operators can have their phones or iPads out and about on the set, and the director can be able to see all the angles, call out directions, of course, record the footage, and then the proxy footage is immediately saved on the iPad, and then wirelessly the full footage is moved over later. So you can actually go ahead and start editing on that proxy footage as well if you want to. It's just amazing being able to capture this footage, not only just see what the camera sees, but being able to actually capture it wirelessly from 4 different devices. It's absolutely incredible that Apple has added this. You can also remotely dial in exposure, white balance, focus, and more settings. So from that central iPad that's looking at the 4 sources, you can actually start dialing in settings right there. Apple has really just thought this through. I don't even want to know what kind of technology they're using to keep all 4 of these devices connected to the central iPad to get that video streaming. Amazing work from the Final Cut Pro for iPad team here. Really ought to be lauded for it. Such a great feature, and it's going to be available alongside all the features of Final Cut Pro for iPad 2 later this spring.
I think it's a really interesting time for Final Cut. There's also some interesting things in terms of being able to search for footage through text. It means that you'll be able to search via text for certain objects and whatnot through your dailies and then bring them in nice and quickly for your edit. Very, very helpful. Of course, there's other things with regard to soundtracks and lots more going on in the latest rendition of Final Cut for both iPad and Mac. But I want to talk about the Final Cut camera, which I think was the big surprise of the event. We alluded to it with Live Multicam, but this Final Cut camera app that's coming later in the spring not only allows for multicam, but also allows for pro level controls, something that we've seen a lot of with the Blackmagic camera app, which Apple helped Blackmagic develop, which I thought was really interesting that they didn't just allow Blackmagic to go ahead and do something similar to this, which is the route I was hoping things were going to go down. Maybe they still will. We'll have to see come WWDC. But basically, the Final Cut camera will automatically transfer and sync each live multicam angle into Final Cut Pro, where I'm a little bit disappointed myself, being that I've used cameras and predominantly run a Mac to centralize everything in my workflow, is that multicam compatibility isn't coming to Mac OS. Maybe that's because there are no M4 Macs right now, which kind of continues on this frustrating ecosystem workflow between iPad OS and Mac OS. There are a lot of things that you can do in terms of a project on Mac OS that you can't transfer over to the iPad. And now you've got the iPad and multicam, which you can't bring to the Mac. And it feels like very much that there are 2 very different products at this moment in time. And I'd love to see that convergence again, because it's what we're all used to. It's what Apple are best at when it comes to their ecosystem and services. You know, you're able to take a project file and take it somewhere else. And you're able to do that pretty much everywhere apart from Final Cut. So it's going to be really interesting in the coming months to see what the story is when it comes to macOS and when Macs move to M4 as well. Hopefully that gap is bridged. And that brings us to Logic Pro 2. Really interesting this time around because, of course, AI was mentioned a number of times during this keynote. Specifically, though, I kind of had my ears prick up with the Logic Pro 2 announcements, starting with the addition of session players for bass and keyboard thanks to AI, which is very cool, but also maybe controversial in some ways. We'll have to see how that pans out and how the public perceive it. We also got a new plugin called Chroma Glow for a warmer sound, which uses artificial intelligence to model the sounds produced by a blend of the world's most revered studio hardware. Very, very cool, I thought. It's very difficult to get that warm sound from digital instruments. So to see that actually come to fruition is going to be really interesting. And then we got a stem splitter, which I've seen a number of times. I picked up a couple of years ago now. There was this piece of hardware that a certain Kanye West was promoting that I picked up called the stem player. And one of the things that its software did was it split your music track into separate stems, and it extracted the voice, the bass, and the drums, and other instruments. You were allowed to kind of play around and remix, but you had to do this via a website. And it was all kind of processed off on a server somewhere far, far away. Apple were doing the same thing with Stem Splitter, which will take any recording and quickly extract into 4 distinct parts, of course, voice, bass, drums, and other instruments. But it's all on device. And the demo shows it to be super, super quick, which makes sense with the M4 chip. So really, really excited for Logic Pro 2. I am not currently a user of Logic Pro 2, but the way things are going, there may be some use cases here for me. So I'll be giving it a go when it becomes available this Monday, May the 13th. That's a software. Shall we get into accessories? Because the big story has always been with iPad, the accessories. I think it's part of the announcements that we both look forward to the most when it comes to iPad and the overall story. So let's start with, I think, the highlight, really, Apple Pencil Pro. Who knew you needed a Pro pencil?
Well, apparently Apple did, because they're expanding the Apple Pencil lineup with the Apple Pencil Pro. This kind of sits above the Apple Pencil parentheses USB-C that we saw debut last year. This one adds a bunch of really interesting new features to the Apple Pencil that I think especially digital artists are going to just absolutely love. So the first thing it adds is a squeeze gesture that allows you to invoke a tool palette. So as you're holding your Apple Pencil above the screen, you can squeeze it and it'll give you a selection of tools. And then you can use hover, of course, to select a tool and start drawing or illustrating or whatever it is that you're doing with the Apple Pencil. It also includes a haptic engine to give user feedback about actions like squeezing. That's something I talked about last week with my Apple Pencil. I never completely know if what I'm doing with the Apple Pencil is what I want it to do, if I'm making the connection or double tapping right or whatever it is. So having that physical feedback, I think, is really smart. And then something I hadn't even considered, Apple is including a gyroscope in the Apple Pencil Pro for rotating brushes, objects, and other tools. And this will integrate with Apple Pencil Hover to preview what a stroke will look like. If you didn't watch Apple's keynote video, check out this part of it because it's really interesting to see the artist. They pick which brush they're going to use, and then they hold the pencil over the iPad, but as they turn the pencil, the angle of the brush changes. It's really cool to see. And I have to imagine that for people who use the Apple Pencil every day to make things and maybe even make a living, these are going to be really, really helpful tools for getting things done. These new features are all available to developers as well, so creators of apps can actually customize what these different things do. There was a demo with Procreate showing off what they're doing, including a really cool use of the haptic engine that I thought was really interesting anyway, where when you line up objects and they're aligned properly, it will actually give you a little shake to let you know you're where you're supposed to be. Very cool, and I like that developers will be able to change up what these features do and make it fit their particular app. I can't wait to see what they do with it. Now, as I predicted, the Apple Pencil Pro connects magnetically to the iPad Pro and iPad Air for pairing, charging, and storing. Apple didn't go into the details of how they're making this work with the camera there. They just made it work because they're Apple and that's what they do, right? So the camera's there, the pencil goes right on top, it attaches magnetically. There's no need for a wire, which I very much appreciate. It also includes Find My support, so if you misplace your pencil, it's easy to track down. The Apple Pencil Pro costs $129, the same as the Apple Pencil 2, which still remains for sale at that same price. The only iPad Apple still sells that supports the Apple Pencil 2 is the iPad mini, but since it didn't get support for the Apple Pencil Pro, I guess they're going to have to keep it on sale for as long as that mini is there. But it's compatible with the new iPad Air and iPad Pro. So if you're picking up new iPad Air or iPad Pro, you have the choice between the Apple Pencil Pro or the Apple Pencil (USB-C). They've got a chart on their website to let you know which one to pick. Check it out. It's very interesting. A lot of different dots and matrices to let you know what you're getting. But if you really want the best Apple Pencil, now you know it's Apple Pencil Pro.
Yeah, really, really exciting to see what they do possibly with the Apple Pencil when it comes to like Final Cut. I can imagine a number of possibilities there. Maybe turning your pencil and having different transition styles. Oh, yeah. That kind of thing I think would be really, really cool. It's great that the price is staying the same at $129. And I think that Find My support is going to be really, really helpful. I have personally lost 3 Apple Pencil Pros in my time, albeit one of them was taken from me rather than lost. Now, the Magic Keyboard. The new Magic Keyboard for iPad Pro is thinner and lighter, has a larger trackpad, with colour-matched aluminium palm rests, a function row, which we'll get into in a minute, and is available in both black and white, for $299 for the 11-inch variant and $349 for the 13-inch. I will say I'm sad because the touch bar prediction did not come to fruition. But we are happy, aren't we? Because we got the function row, something that was sorely missed really from the Magic Keyboard's inception.
Most definitely. I've been missing it for as long as I've had the Magic Keyboard. I've been wishing for it, and I'm happy to see it come. I'm really interested to see these Magic Keyboards in person and get more hands-on photos and things with it because it's an interesting combination of materials. The outside looks basically the same as the previous version of the Magic Keyboard, though it is thinner. But on the inside, you've got what looks a lot more like a MacBook in terms of what your hand is resting on, the size of the trackpad, the keyboard that includes the function rows. So it's almost like a more premium experience on the inside while the outside stays the same, which is a really interesting way to upgrade a product. But I think people are going to be pleased with the experience of it. Although I think some people were hoping for like an all aluminum casing, which didn't end up happening. So it's that same outer shell, but hopefully the inside where you're actually resting your hands and typing on the keys and all that, hopefully that'll hold up a little bit better now that they've added aluminum to it.
Now, in terms of the colors for the iPad Pros, if you were to go with an iPad Pro, would you go with the normal aluminium or would you go with the darker? Because I looked at some hands-on photos and I've got to say, I think the darker variant holds up a little better.
Not only does the darker version hold up better over time, although that silver I'm sure is going to look great on a Magic Keyboard, but they're actually switching to space black for these iPad Pros, which was a color introduced with the last version of the MacBook Pro. And I've seen that color in person. I've compared it to space gray, and I have to say I love space black as a color segment. It's really nice. It is actually significantly darker than space gray, which I love. And I think using it as the accent color on that Magic Keyboard was really smart. And so I would 100% go for Space Black if given the opportunity.
Well, talking of smart, another smart choice is the Smart Folio. Now offering a wider range of viewing angles. It's available for iPad Air in light violet, charcoal grey, sage and denim, and for iPad Pro available in white, black and denim. Interesting choice of name for that finish, denim. $79 for the 11-inch, $99 for the 13-inch. And yeah, that's an option if you don't need a keyboard.
I think we should take a moment and in memoriam, Sigmund, for the Smart Keyboard Folio, which seems to have gone the way of so many Apple products of yore. It's still for sale on Apple's website, but it's not compatible with the new iPad Pro or iPad Air. So if you were someone who wanted a keyboard for your iPad, but not necessarily a trackpad, or if you wanted a keyboard but didn't want to shell out the full price for the Magic Keyboard, there's no longer a Smart Keyboard option available for you with these new iPads. So I appreciate the simplifying of the accessory lineup for sure, just having this one keyboard available for this generation of iPad Air and iPad Pro. But I'll admit, I had a special place in my heart for the Smart Keyboard Folio, and I'll miss it a little bit.
I also think, like, in terms of the lineup for iPads this time round, everything is a lot more simplified. We got a price drop on the base model, $349, which is a great starting point. Means that it's also, I think, the death of the home button. That's now gone, finally. I think it's going to be interesting to see how older customers adapt when it comes to their next iPad purchase. Now, we do this crazy thing where before an event, we put out some predictions. I'm better at Oscar predictions than I am event predictions recently, but I do have at least 2 more goes at it this year with WWDC in September, and who knows what else we may be thrown by Apple. Let's get into our regular picks. 1 point for each. My first pick was that the Apple Vision Pro international rollout would be announced. Well, it could still happen this week, but it didn't happen during the event, so as a cross against my name. What was your first pick?
My first pick was that the new iPad Pro would feature an always-on display in standby mode. I really thought OLED would unlock this capability like it did on the iPhone, and unfortunately it did not, so I didn't get that point either.
My next pick was that the new iPad Pro will have the ability to shoot spatial video. I was almost certain that this was an easy point. I'm still shocked by the omission. Your second regular pick was that the front-facing camera on the new iPad Air would be located on the long side. Well, it happened both on the iPad Air and the iPad Pro, so well done for following the rumours, Devon. Then I decided that I was going to herald the return of the touch bar on the new Magic Keyboard. Honestly, I think I did it more for the reaction. Mike Hurley saw my toot about this earlier in the week and quoted Michael Caine in The Dark Knight, saying that some people just want to see the world burn, which I appreciated. And then, of course, your prediction for the new Magic Keyboard to have function keys came to fruition, as we both know. My last regular pick was that the Apple Pencil would be introduced by David Hockney. I have no idea where that came from, apart from the fact that he was so involved in the artwork that was projected onto Apple's Battersea campus during the holiday. And finally, your last regular pick was that the new Apple Pencil would charge magnetically, which of course you got right. Although I gotta say, it charged magnetically before, and so I was always a little bit confused on this pick, but I'll let it go. You got 3 points. Now here's the thing, we've got X's against our out there picks. I said that there would be, for my out there pick, iPad to iPad universal control would be introduced. My question is, whilst it might not be full universal control, do I get something at least for the iPad camera being able to be controlled by another iPad, isn't that kind of universal control, but with limited function?
I'd agree with you that that's an incomplete part of universal control. It's not, controlling the apps and the text editing and all that, Sigmund. But you know what? I'm feeling generous, so I'll give you 2/3 credit for that if that's what you want.
I mean, at least it's not a whitewash, right? I'm tired of whitewashes, especially after the football last night. But we won't get into it. Your out there pick was that a new paid Apple service or tier of an existing service would be announced. You were very close, right? Because there is a new plugin for Logic Pro 2, but it's not a tier. With your generosity, the predictions end 3-2 to yourself. So congratulations. When I saw Killers of the Flower Moon in the demo for the iPad Pro, the first thing I thought was, that should have been a pick for Devon in terms of getting his own back after the Oscar predictions. And then my second thought on it was, how dare they zoom in to go full screen on the iPad Pro? Martin Scorsese would not be a happy chap seeing that.
I agree with you. Zooming in on iPad video is an atrocity that should not be done. But Apple did make several Apple Original creators happy, I hope, by featuring their posters in the back of one of the sets during the event. I saw Sugar, I saw Palm Royale, and I saw Dark Matter all advertised, which I thought was very cool. Just a nice little Easter egg for Apple TV Plus fans to see those titles featured in the event.
Yeah, I love it. One film that came out recently that I checked out last weekend was The Fall Guy. I don't know if you've heard about it. It's with Ryan Gosling and Emily Blunt. It's a really fun action comedy that really puts the focus on stunt people. Loved it. But there is one setup in the film where you've got like a home cinema setup and you've got the director of the upcoming film viewing the footage on a couch, and then behind her, the editor of the film going through everything. And I saw this setup and I started moving furniture around this past week, seeing if I could copy it. And then I got in my head the idea of how amazing would it be to have an XDR-like display in such a setup. So I have ordered an iPad Pro to look at. I need to say that. And about an hour before we started recording, because you can check out all of these 3D models of the new products, especially on Apple Vision Pro, I started moving things around and visualizing. And so I've picked up a iPad Pro to check out. Whether or not I'll be keeping it, I think it's really going to be dependent on what's announced at WWDC for iPadOS this time round. And I picked up an iPad Air as promised for a family member. That's literally going to be used for, I think, Apple Arcade and games and email and that kind of thing, which I think, the M2 in an iPad Air is still kind of absurd to me for those use cases. But hey, someone's going to be very, very happy. Now, you're the iPad guy, so I can only imagine the trouble you're going to get into when you tell me what you ordered. Or were you able to tighten the purse strings?
Well, this year, if you look at my spending history, I'm the Vision Pro guy. That was my purchase for the year. And when I was making the decision to buy that, the trade-off was, well, I know these new iPads are coming and I'm not going to be able to participate in that if I do the Vision Pro. So that was the decision I made. And even after seeing these new iPad Pros, as impressive as they are, I'm still happy with my decision. I love my Vision Pro. I love spending time in Vision OS and spatial computing. So I love that very much. At the same time, of course, these iPads are very tempting between the OLED and honestly, Sigmund, I'm shallow like that, but the space black finish honestly draws me in, and that new Magic Keyboard with the aluminum palm rest. I mean, it all looks incredible. And, I'm looking at my M1 iPad Pro now and I'm like, well, why don't you have aluminum on your palm rest? Why aren't you space black, right? So the seeds are there, but I'm going to be sticking with my M1 iPad Pro for now. It does everything that I need it to do. It performs very well. and I enjoy it very much for things that I don't do on my Vision Pro. So for now, I'm going to be sticking with that, but I will be keeping an eye out, just like you, at WWDC. I'm curious, hopefully not, but I'm curious if there's going to be any software features that come to iPadOS this year that may be limited and not available on the M1, and that would be something that would make me reconsider. So we'll have to see how that goes, but for now, M1 iPad Pro for me. I'm not buying anything today.
Well, I think we'll wrap this up by saying follow the coverage over on Mac Stories from Federico, John, and the rest of the team. Lots and lots to read through throughout the coming weeks as we get our hands on the new hardware and no doubt next month, new software. A huge congratulations to both the hardware and software teams at Apple. And also, I think a huge congratulations really to what iPad has become and actually the longevity of these products. I know people are still using the 2018 iPad Pro and will probably continue to do so for a long time to come. So
an exciting week full of Apple product announcements, Sigmund. Had a lot of fun recapping all of that with you. I'm excited to hear what other people think about these announcements, so be sure to let us know what you think and what you're ordering as well and how you plan on using these new iPads. But I think it's about time we get into some Apple TV now, Sigmund, with our highlight of the week, Dark Matter.
Jason Desson is abducted into an alternate version of his life. To get back to his true family, though, he embarks on a harrowing journey to save them from the most terrifying foe imaginable, himself.
A man of science. He is married to the woman of his dreams. Coffee to go?
Oh my gosh, you're my hero.
Until one night, he doesn't make it home.
We need to show you the box. Behind every door in there is a version of your life that you could have lived.
What if the person that abducted me is me?
Dark Matter is based on the book by Blake Crouch, who also serves as showrunner and writer. The show stars Joel Edgerton and Jennifer Connelly, and beside the jaw-dropping intro sequence that kind of reminded me of an old PS3 game called Echo Space, highly recommend if you've not checked it out, mind-boggling. I've got to ask, what did you think of the very first episode? Without giving too much away though, Devon.
For sure, we promise not to spoil anything. This show plays into our current multiverse moment, but with a twist. What if an evil version of yourself wanted to replace you and was able to do it? So that is a scary thought, I'd say, for sure. Jason Desson is a professor of physics and someone who theoretically would be able to figure out in some life how to travel between universes, and apparently some version of him did, because he comes across the void here and tries to replace him in his life. That's the setup for the show. And it's a really interesting take, I would say, on this whole multiverse idea, which you've seen play out in all kinds of places. Of course, we just saw it on Constellation. And of course, Marvel has been in the middle of a multiverse saga for so many years now, I've kind of lost track. Just an interesting idea of, kind of that evil twin, that part of you that you don't feed, but, we all have a side of us that can be hateful, or maybe you'd even call it evil, and we try to nourish the parts of ourselves that are good, but maybe there's a version of ourselves out there that didn't have the same circumstances and didn't nourish that side, right? And what happens when they come for us? So it's a very interesting idea, and one that I've definitely been thinking about since I watched the very first episode. I will say the pilot itself is interesting. It starts off very straightforward and typical. It's just this guy with his family. He's going to work. He's teaching his son to drive. His friend calls him about some award. It's just these very everyday things that he goes through. And then all of a sudden on a walk home, it takes this very sudden and disorienting turn where someone pulls up and throws him into a van, and it turns out, of course, again, to be a version of himself from another world. The show doesn't do anything too out there stylistically. We talked about other series that are running like Sugar, which really kind of keeps you on your toes with the style. You just never really know what each episode's going to do as far as format and stylistically. This one's a lot more straightforward. It feels like, honestly, watching this first episode feels like reading the first chapter of a sci-fi book, right? Just very much the plot and taking you along for the ride. But I think that style is good for this kind of plot where it can get convoluted very quickly. And also, too, this is an adaptation of Blake Crouch's book. So really, we're just getting to see his vision for the story come to a different format, which I think is very cool. Like I said, it can be a little bit disorienting at times, but by the final line of the first episode, you know exactly what's going on. And now we just have to wait for Jason himself to catch up and see what he does when he realizes he's crossed the great multiversal divide. That's the setup for the series. I'm very excited to see where they go with it. I think it's a great premise and one that I can't wait to see play out.
The way I described this first episode and through the trailer, what we can expect in the series to come, this is like a bit of a mix of Apple original series Shining Girls and Inception in a funny way. The music in this, though, is absolutely fantastic. Very quick credit to Jen Malone, who continues her outstanding work as music supervisor on this series, following her previous work on Atlanta and Euphoria, two shows that I highly recommend you check out as well. Dark Matter makes its global debut with its first 2 episodes today across all of your screens on Apple TV+. Cannot wait to recap this later down the line, Devon.
Most definitely. Moving into Apple TV news, Rasmus Larson at Flat Panels HD reports that LG is the first smart TV maker to add support for Dolby Atmos playback in Apple Music. This feature is compatible with 2018 and later LG smart TVs via the built-in speakers on select models, LG soundbars from 2023 or 24, and Apple AirPods connected by Bluetooth. Alongside the update, LG is offering users a free 3-month trial to Apple Music in the app. Now, as HomePod users, Sigmund, we've had access to Dolby Atmos playback in Apple Music for quite some time, but of course Apple Music is on all kinds of different platforms and smart TVs, so it's cool to see this integration coming to LG, and I hope we can see it come to other smart TVs in the future as well.
Another company that are looking into lossless playback, and no doubt there'll be compatibility with Apple Music down the line, is Sonos. According to The Verge and some leaked images, will be launching their very first set of headphones. The Sonos Ace is carrying a design that I think borrows pretty heavily, at least characteristic-wise, from AirPods Max, just of course less metal. And it appears to be an all-black plastic construction with buttons and toggles on both ear cups. The Sonos Ace headphones will offer both wired and wireless lossless audio, as well as tight integration with the company's whole home audio system. So owners of Sonos soundbars will be able to listen to TV audio on the headphones, for example. And of course, we know Sonos speakers are AirPlay compatible. It'll be really interesting to see if the Sonos Ace headphones will be as well, which would of course open the company up to people that don't necessarily need the whole home cinema or smart speaker system and just want the headphones. It's going to be interesting to see what kind of compatibility comes to iOS devices and of course our beloved Apple TV.
Yeah, it's interesting to see their strategy here, which is almost the opposite of what Apple did, right? Apple started with headphones and moved into the home space with the HomePod, and now Sonos is doing the reverse. But it's interesting the kind of integrations just within their ecosystem that they'll be able to come up with, the technologies they'll be able to layer together to really bring something unique to these headphones. And of course, sound quality, I mean, it's Sonos. You've got to bet that they're going to be great. So I'm excited to see them enter this space and maybe push it in some new directions, add some competition, and who knows, maybe we'll see some features from the Sonos Ace appear on AirPods Max 2 when they definitely come out someday in the future.
I'm not really in the running for a Sonos home cinema setup because, of course, I have a whole home theatre setup that I'm very proud of. So proud. I keep mentioning it, Devon, but there we are. One of the things I watched this week that really drove some of my speakers and filled the room with an eeriness is, of course, the latest trailer for Presumed Innocent. We got a sneak preview this week of what is a gripping journey through a horrific murder that upends the Chicago prosecuting attorney's office when one of its own is suspected of the crime. And before we talk about the trailer, here's a small clip.
Love isn't what people tell you that it is. In my experience, it's just something that grows. Until one day, you just find yourself needing someone. That's how it was with Carolyn.
She woke something up inside me.
I can't stop thinking about her.
Were you aware that Carolyn was murdered?
The upcoming series is from David E. Kelly and J.J. Abrams, starring and executive produced by a personal favourite of mine, Jake Gyllenhaal. This shares the name of a classic 1996 Harrison Ford feature film and is an adaptation of that. Now, from someone that hasn't seen that film, Devon, what were your thoughts on this trailer?
I was surprised and amazed by just how deep and dark the trailer goes immediately. And maybe I should have been expecting that based on the premise. And again, I haven't seen the original film. But my goodness, did this thing just completely change my mood when I watched it? I mean, it's a short trailer too. It's not very long, but it just goes there. Very, very dark. And of course, the premise of the show is heavy. It's someone dies and then a person in power is accused of possibly being involved. And so the series is going to go there, but they want you to know immediately what this show's about and where it's going to take you, which I appreciate, but I wasn't necessarily anticipating. I think this series has potential for sure to be something that a lot of people will watch. It's the kind of intriguing premise that is sure to draw a crowd, especially considering its legacy. I think kind of building upon that previous film, maybe even bringing it into Apple TV Plus for a little while ahead of time to get people ready for it might be cool. But regardless, between the star power and people's familiarity with the story, I think that this is one that really could be a hit for Apple TV Plus. What'd you think?
So I remember the 1996 feature film, and one thing I will say is Apple do not release that film for people to watch ahead of this series, especially if it's an adaptation, because it will just absolutely ruin it for you. And I'm really interested to see what the pacing is and how we get to the climax this time around. One of the big elements of the original was that you didn't know whether the main actor, that time Harrison Ford, was the main culprit or not. Watching the trailer, I kind of got Nightcrawler vibes, which features, honestly, by far my favourite performance from Jake Gyllenhaal. This project looks like it has the potential to surpass that performance on some level. And so what I would suggest is, rather than spoil yourself by watching Presumed Innocent, the 1996 version, check out the infamous Nightcrawler from Dan Gilroy, which actually celebrates its 10th anniversary later this year. I think it's going to be a great appetizer for Presumed Innocent, which premieres on Apple TV Plus across all of your screens, beginning Wednesday, June 12th. And that's not the only Apple original we have to look forward to, because we have a ton of release news, including some gaming announcements with new releases for Apple Arcade at the end of May and early June. They include a spatial version of the award-winning Where Cards Fall for Apple Vision Pro on May 30th. And on June 6th, new titles Rabbids Legends of the Multiverse, Return to Monkey Island Plus, which is a classic. I know a lot of people will be really excited for that. Tomb of the Mask Plus, and finally, the fabulous Wedding Disaster Plus. Now, I've never been involved in any wedding disasters. Have you?
I can't say I've been involved in any wedding disasters, but there is something about that time management genre of game that really does draw me in. So maybe I could live out some of those wedding disaster fears through this game when it comes out on June 6th. Some great releases coming to Apple Arcade, and excited to see another spatial title as well. Now, in terms of releases that we aren't expecting anytime soon, this week we did get confirmation that the release of Tehran Season 3 has been put on hold by a mutual agreement between Apple and Israel's Khan public broadcaster due to the ongoing war in Gaza. So, not the biggest reason to be hoping and praying for an end to that war, Sigmund, but of course we do continue to wish for peace in Gaza.
Now for something altogether a lot more positive, Ted Lasso, the complete series. We talked about it coming to Blu-ray last week. We even left a link in the show notes for the listing on Amazon. Well, you can now click that link to pre-order, because it's since confirmed for both Blu-ray and DVD release on July 30th. So yeah, the link for the DVD and Blu-ray pre-orders are in the show notes. Of course, if you save the link from last week's show, that will work too. Now, with the announcement of iPad Pros this week, I'll be honest, as soon as the keynote finished, I checked out social media and saw this bit of news, and it kind of made me think twice about an iPad purchase, because I thought maybe I should put my money towards flights for something that we have been talking about for a long, long time. We'd been hoping, we'd been pleading. Schmigadoon is seeing a stage adaptation early next year at the Kennedy Center's Broadway Center Stage in Washington, D.C. It's been announced this week that the Schmigadoon stage musical will get its world premiere production at the Kennedy Center's Eisenhower Theatre in a run set for January 31st to February the 9th. It's based, of course, on the Emmy-winning series that ran for 2 seasons on Apple TV Plus from 2021 to 2023. A 3rd season was in the works. Plenty of original songs as well, written by Cinco Paul and team. Now, like the series, this adaptation is going to focus on 2 New York doctors, Josh and Melissa, who go backpacking in a last-ditch attempt to save their failing relationship, but instead they get lost in the woods and end up trapped in Schmigadoon, a magical town that's a classic Golden Age musical come to life. Casting has yet to be announced for the stage musical, but I think we're very, very excited about this. Is this going to be the thing that finally gets us to be in the same place at the same time?
I think if anything could, Sigmund, it would be this. Neither of us saw this coming, but it really is happening, and I am so very excited to see it come to fruition. Now, if any of the producers of Schmigadoon the Musical are listening, I'm going to give you an idea that I really hope you go with. Just as in the TV show there was a division between the real world and the Schmigadoon world, I think the scenes where Josh and Melissa stumble into Schmigadoon, where they're on their hike in the quote-unquote real world, that should be pre-recorded on a screen. And then when they stumble across the bridge, then they emerge onto the stage and the real action takes place in Schmigadoon on stage. That's my concept for Schmigadoon the Musical, Sigmund. But either way, I'm just really happy that this is happening and so excited that Schmigadoon lives on in a stage adaptation that we've always known it deserved.
Couldn't agree more. And, you know, I truly believe, we've mentioned this a couple of times on the podcast, but I truly believe the future of this show, when it comes to Apple, is for this to be in spatial video. And this just makes a lot of sense. I'm so happy for everyone involved, because it was really gutting news when we heard of its cancellation. I'm really interested to see if this becomes a multi-part experience, a bit like the adaptation of one of the Harry Potter books. And I'd be so down for it, like multiple evenings to be able to follow this story in its entirety. Overjoyed by this news.
Well, we'll keep an eye out for any casting news for Schmigadoon the Musical and let you know. But in the meantime, we do have a bit of casting news for Firebug, who revealed its ensemble cast this week, with Trying's Rafe Spall, Blackbird's Greg Kinnear, Natari Guma Babaho Mawine, and Hannah Emily Anderson joining the drama series, led, of course, by Taron Egerton, from creator Dennis Lehane. The series will follow a troubled detective and an enigmatic arson investigator as they pursue the trail of two serial arsonists. A great cast there and some Apple TV Plus alums that I'm excited to see again. In the world of rumors or things that we've heard behind the scenes that haven't been officially announced, the Ankler reports that Apple is currently floating the idea of changing up the way the company compensates the creatives behind Apple Original Series, paying less upfront but offering more back-end bonuses based on the show's performance. Some interpret this as a scheme to pay creators less, while others see it as an opportunity for the company to take more risks and even renew less popular shows at a lower rate. So, I am not someone who's super familiar with the insides of Hollywood and how this all works. I could definitely see the cynical take here where it just looks like the company may be wanting to pay less for their series, but I think Apple have proven that as a company, they're actually willing to pay premium and really take care of people to get the star power and the talent that they want, both in front of and behind the camera. So I don't really see that. I don't really see this news going about this way. It actually sounds like some people who are negotiating this deal are excited about it because it gives them opportunities to create a hit and be compensated for it. So I would say that so long as this is creating opportunities for people to make more money and not be paid less, that's a good thing. And if this does give us more renewals for series that maybe were kind of on the line and maybe with some budgeting reworking, they could possibly come back, I like that idea as well. There are so many series that get canceled, of course, that I'm just heartbroken over. There was a long string of those, Sigmund, on the show where it felt like every week something I loved was getting canceled. And if even one of those shows could have been saved by just changing up the budget a little bit and everyone being willing to do it at a different rate, then I think that would have been awesome to be able to continue to work and see those stories. So we'll see if this actually plays out, but I thought it was an interesting little behind-the-scenes look at how some of these shows get made and how some of these conversations are going with Apple and Hollywood right now.
I think the first thing, whenever you hear change, you think, especially from the likes of Apple and Amazon, it's understandable that there would be a little bit of resistance there, considering the amount of money both companies generate. But also, these are companies with businesses. And if you want something good to continue, you have to make those adjustments. That's just genuine business acumen at this point. We'll get into this subject a little deeper next week on the show. But let's talk about this week's Apple TV releases. Of course, they begin today with the 2-episode premiere of our highlight, Dark Matter. And that premiere is joined by new episodes of Loot and The Big Door Prize, alongside the finale of Palm Royale, and of course another brilliant episode of Acapulco. I'm really happy to hear that our recommendation got through to a new viewer, Tim Stringer, who reached out to us both on Mastodon this week to say what a fantastic discovery this was for him personally. So the more people we're getting to check out Acapulco, I think the warmer we feel, even if the weather isn't necessarily doing its job in that regard. On Friday, we see the penultimate episodes of both Sugar and Franklin. Some really interesting theories we'll get into in a little bit on Sugar especially. Followed by Friday Night Baseball, Arizona Diamondbacks at Baltimore Orioles at 7 p.m. Eastern, and Kansas City Royals at Los Angeles Angels at 9:30 p.m. Eastern. But on Saturday and Sunday, we have the start of MLS Rivalry Week as part of the MLS Season Pass. That Rivalry Week runs from the 11th through to the 18th of May, and highlights this week include, on May 11th, the Columbus Crew facing off with FC Cincinnati, followed by a matchup of the Portland Timbers and Seattle Sounders FC on May 12th. The season subscription is down 30% compared to its $99 price at the start of the season, and for Apple TV Plus subscribers, coverage for the remainder of the season can now be purchased for just $59.
Also releasing today is our mini highlight of the week, 3-part documentary Hollywood Con Queen. A mysterious figure known as the Con Queen is impersonating powerful female executives in Hollywood, luring victims with the promise of life-changing career opportunities. A journalist and a private investigator set out to find the culprit behind the scam.
I get a call from this Hollywood producer.
This is gonna make you a star.
6 days later, I'm on a flight.
Creative professionals were lured overseas on the promise of work by somebody impersonating powerful Hollywood executives.
I'd exhausted all my savings.
$200,
$1,000.
over $1 million.
But it wasn't about money. She wanted to get inside the dreams of people and destroy them.
How do I get out of here? Who do I trust?
She's known as
The Con Queen.
Con Queen.
Ain't the nicest criminal you'd ever know.
This documentary comes to us from Chris Smith. Sigmund, I know you had a chance to check it out early. What did you think of the Hollywood Con Queen?
I absolutely loved it. This is a series that kind of starts off as an investigative documentary about a wide, and I mean like global net scam that targets filmmakers, photographers, publicists, pretty much everyone within the film industry. For the most part, sees a lot of the victims travel to Indonesia for different scouting missions and all sorts of things on their own dime, on the promise that it's going to lead to a massive project. Really interesting because, of course, internet scams are rife and are really like targeting people's sensibilities, whether that's love, whether that's a project that's going to really help someone go up the ladder in terms of career. And what's really interesting about this 3-part documentary, it really turns more into a fascinating dissection of a disturbed individual whose manipulative ways are examined through the lens of his perceived trauma, as well as through the lens of family, former friends, and acquaintances. There are, I think, lots of lessons to be learnt from this documentary. And it really goes to places that you don't necessarily expect. A fantastic example of budget documentary filmmaking and investigative journalism, and a great example of how to tell a story with limited resources. I don't want to say too much because I don't want to ruin it, but I really think it's a worthwhile view. I watched each part one after the other, and thankfully you can do the same, as all 3 parts are now available on Apple TV Plus across all of your screens. Check out Hollywood Con Queen this week. Now, that's not all. As we know, we've got extras, and they start with yet another highlight on previously the #1 movie in streaming, Argylle. Tell us about it.
Yeah, this is a behind-the-scenes extra featuring Bryce Dallas Howard talking about stunt training for her action star role in Argylle. Just a fun little look behind the scenes at how the movie was made, and it's always interesting to see how actors prepare for these sorts of roles. So yeah, definitely check that one out. We'll link it in the show notes. Next up, we've got Looks Like Loot with Michaela J. Rodriguez and Joel Kim Booster. This is the 2 actors talking about the styles on the show and how those styles compare to how they dress in their normal life and how much they enjoy getting to play these ridiculous characters that they play on such a wonderful and enjoyable show. Finally, in terms of extras, we've got the cast of Sugar reading fan theories. This video was very cool to see. I loved watching the 3 lead actors from Sugar sharing what fans think is going on with the show, and then they're kind of hinting at how accurate and how far off some of these theories are. And it's interesting to see how people are interpreting this show. It almost reminds me of Servant, Sigmund, back when everyone was trying to figure out what was going on with that show. And it's incredible that Sugar has inspired so much speculation as well. And really cool to see some fan theories going on there.
All I could think when they were going through the fan theories in this extra was that one of the fans that wrote in was probably Travis, the character in the 2nd season of The After Party, played by Paul Walter Hauser, who was completely wrong on pretty much everything. Made me chuckle. So a great way to round up this week's releases on Apple TV. But of course, we end, as we do each week, with our up next picks. We're a few days out, but was the 4th with you? On May the 4th?
The 4th is always with me, Sigmund. The 4th is with all of us.
Of
course, this past weekend was Star Wars Day, May the 4th, and Disney celebrated by giving us a new animated series in the world of Star Wars. It's called Star Wars Tales of the Empire. It's a sequel to a previous pick that I've shared on the show before, which was called Star Wars Tales of the Jedi, one that I really enjoyed. It was an animated series that was set within the prequel era in Star Wars. Well, this one's set a little bit later during the Imperial era, and it follows the stories of two characters that Star Wars fans will recognize: Night Sister Morgan Elsbeth, who you will know from The Mandalorian and Ahsoka, and former Jedi Barriss Offee, who's appeared in some previous animated series before. So this is 15-minute episodes. There's 6 of them, each focusing on one of these two characters. So it's a nice short watch, but it's a fun way to learn a little bit more about the characters in Star Wars, the world of Star Wars, this particular era. And I really like this format for just getting more from Star Wars animation. What they're doing with their animation there is really incredible. I love everything that they put out. They just wrapped up Star Wars The Bad Batch on Disney+, which was another great animated series. And I hope to see them continue the animation in Star Wars, whether it be through this shorter format or longer format series. Either way, I just love what they're doing there and love getting to spend time in the world that way. So that's my pick this week, Star Wars Tales of the Empire on Disney+. Check it out. What have you got for us, Sigmund?
Well, as usual, before my up next pick, some TV app highlights. Very, very brief this time. I'm just going to say a category and a title. For the family, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire is now available in the TV app. For horror fans, I'm going to recommend Abigail. The trailer looks frightening enough, but it's basically a possessed girl that attacks people. It looks like a lot of fun, but apparently it's very, very gory. If you're into like French romantic fare, may I recommend the drama The Taste of Things, which premieres this week in the TV app. And for those looking for something a little more CW, may I recommend the return of Pretty Little Liars with its 2nd season on Max. Now, on Max, there was another return, and I really kicked myself after we recorded because I hadn't even realised that this was coming back so soon. Thankfully, I had the Up Next queue in the TV app to save my blushes. Hacks has returned for a 3rd season. This is a previous recommendation by me, and the premise is about a legendary Las Vegas stand-up comedy diva who needs to reinvent her aging act to avoid losing her residency at the Palmetto Casino. And she's paired with Ava, who is a young comedy writer who is unable to find work due to an insensitive tweet and her reputation for being self-centered and arrogant. Well, I've really enjoyed watching the first 2 seasons, watching their relationship blossom amongst the parallels of age and sensitivity and so much more. Season 2 ended in a way that I thought, oh no, what are they going to do with season 3? And I'm really, really happy to say that the first 2 episodes of this 3rd season are just as well executed as the first 2 seasons. So I won't say too much more than that, because if you haven't seen Hacks, my gosh, don't let anyone ruin it for you. Start the binge now. New episodes of Hacks release on Sundays on Max in the United States. And that is my recommendation this week. Hacks on Max.
I like it, Sigmund. Thanks for that recommendation and those highlights as well. Well, with that, we're going to call it a week here on Magic Rays of Light. We want to thank everyone so much for joining us. Of course, we always appreciate your feedback, so be sure to follow us on Apple Podcasts, leave us a rating and review there. You can contact us on social media via the links in the show notes, or you can email the show or send us an iMessage to magic@macstories.net. Speaking of macstories.net, be sure to check out the site. Tons of coverage of this week's Apple event today and continuing throughout the week. Lots and lots of great stuff happening at Mac Stories, so be sure to visit us there and see the work that's going on. As for us, we'll be back next week with the Big Cigar and a recap of Palm Royale. A long-awaited recap, I would say, Sigmund, one that we're very excited to discuss. So be sure to finish up on Palm Royale and come back to discuss it with us next week. But until then, stay safe, watch some Apple TV, play some Apple Arcade, and have a great week.